Let's try this again. Damien.
G'day, guys.
Hey! Hey, Damien. Welcome to the Adelaide Vegan Festival.
Awesome to be here. Sorry for the delay, keeping anyone waiting there.
Are you in a car?
I am in a vehicle, yeah.
Okay.
We had a bit of a calendar mix-up, so I'm not at home in a nice backyard setting where I'd normally be. I have raced to the car. In my calendar, I'm supposed to be talking to you in about 4 hours. So anyway, here we are. All good.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I gave you a really good intro and you missed all of it. But I was just listing all your achievements, which I'm sure you know about. So.
Yeah, probably stolen half my material.
All right. Well, here's Damien Mander to tell you about his achievements better than I could. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, guys. Just how long am I talking for? Are we doing Q&A?
Definitely do a Q&A. Yeah, we've got a mic ready to go. So you've got 45 minutes.
Okay,
30
cool.
minutes.
Okay, cool. Awesome, guys. Well, thanks very much for having me on today and everybody that's there at the festival. I understand it's been a pretty tough time in Australia, so great to see events like this getting back together. For me, I'm coming to you today from Zimbabwe, where I've been for the last 12 years. So I served in the Australian military as a clearance diver, then across with special operations as a sniper, as part of the 2nd Commando Regiment. In 2005, I ended up heading to Iraq, working as a contractor over there alongside US military forces. And sort of left there after 3 years. I'd done fairly well financially, investing mostly in residential property back in Australia, and sort of didn't need to work for the foreseeable future. I took off to South America and spent a year there trying to figure out the what next, and then it was eventually Africa where I ended up. And having worked in Iraq within a $600 billion a year annual defense budget, where we had any resources we need, and like the context of that, and then the hindsight, being able to see what we were actually over there for. We were just protecting resources in the ground, as part of arguments between old men, and then you come over and you see the work the wildlife rangers are doing. And I suppose in a way it inspired me, really, in a way that I hadn't been inspired before. And we are all a product of our past, so I think the military had given me definitely some global perspective on things, and and then hindsight and being part of a system that had destabilized a country and a region, and almost obliterated a culture there in Iraq. It was sort of, I was at a place in my life where I wanted to really be a part of something different, and the only two things I had was these sort of skills that I'd acquired from the military, and the experience and the money that I'd been able to get through investing back in Australia. And just seeing wildlife rangers who are out, the job that they do, they're spending up to 11 months of the year. They're out there protecting nature, protecting animals, and they get paid a shit salary, and it's like a really thankless task. And it really lacks the awareness that they are due on a global scale. And I say this at a time when civilization has been brought to its knees through COVID. We've got millions of people dead, billions of people that have been through lockdown, and trillions of dollars in international deficit as a direct result of the way that we treat nature and animals. And if we just invested some of that money into looking after this sort of one amazing backyard that we've been given, if we just invested some of that in protecting that in the first place, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So look, it is really great to be talking to you as an audience today, because I know it's a really captive audience. It's people that care, and it's people whose head is already in the right mind space. That frame of mind that doing good things doesn't give us credits to go and do bad things. And so look, it was just this process of seeing what rangers were doing alongside the plight of animals, and that inspired me to go and set up the IAPF in October 2009. And I took a sort of, call it a burn the boat's approach to setting up the organisation. I sold everything I had back in Australia, a residential property portfolio of 5 houses, and just pumped everything into getting this organisation going and supporting myself and the expansion of the organisation. I'd come from the military, so when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, and that was the approach we took in conservation in the early days. The primary thing that we were focusing on was protection of elephant and rhino. So here you had these sort of armed paramilitary style units crossing international borders with high caliber rifles and automatic weapons going up against rangers in an attempt to take out elephant and rhino. Elephant for their tusk and rhino for their horn. And a rhino horn is selling for up to $75,000 a kilogram on the black markets in Vietnam and China. So here you've got an animal that should technically be locked up in a safe, running around an area the size of a small country, and you've got rangers that just don't have the resources to go out and be able to be that last line of defense. And so it was sort of in that context that we set up and just began our journey in conservation. We, over the next 7 years, we scaled up as an organization. We got bigger and bigger in terms of fundraising, the amount of people that we were employing, and the projects and areas, the geographical landscape that we were protecting. And we were focusing on working with other organisations to protect their areas or other governments. The turning point for me, and I'll get onto the vegan side of the program after. So I just want to take you through the conservation journey and then where the shift of the plant-based or the vegan side came in, because it is still, for me personally, the most definitive decision I've made in my life, and the way that has flowed through everything that we do as an organisation and me personally. It just has changed my perspective, as a completely different lens through which to see the world. But the conservation journey for us really started to shift in early 2017. We'd taken on a huge project along the border of Mozambique and South Africa. We were on the Mozambique side of the border. In South Africa is Kruger National Park, and home to about a third of the world's remaining rhino at the time. And it was the reason that rhinoceros were on this sort of global stage as an animal being poached towards extinction, because 70% of the rhinos that were being killed each year were being killed inside this park, and the majority of the poachers that were doing it were coming from Mozambique. And so we went in and set up this very militarized operation along the border there. We had 4 different government departments, 165 personnel. We had helicopters, canine attack teams, drones that were working as part of the operation, and like this military grade hardware. And that's, we went to war with the local population, and we were very successful at stopping poaching coming into the area. We helped drive a downturn in rhino poaching in the region, which eventually led to what was announced as the first global downturn in rhino poaching in almost a decade, in terms of total numbers of rhino killed. And we re-established a rhino population back in Mozambique, where they'd been declared locally extinct. So from a conservation standpoint, it was extremely successful. We got a lot of international recognition for this project. Despite all that, I would lay there at night going, this is not the answer. What we're doing is just, it's not right. Having a war with these local communities, and all the lessons from Iraq were coming back to me, as an occupying force, being in there trying to have this relationship with the local population. It just didn't work. And there's very few examples in history across the world of an occupying force having a long-term good relationship with the local community. So with that in mind, we started looking at other models. We saw a lot of conservation efforts and then community efforts happening in a silo alongside various models that were being deployed. And the reason that they were in silos is because of the militarization that conservation had taken as an industry. And it was becoming extremely hostile, I think, as a way of desperation to try and hold on to areas and species that were in decline, as well as more antagonistic style approaches from poaching groups that were linked to organised crime syndicates, where rhino horn and an elephant tusk are just another currency alongside human trafficking, illegal weapons, drugs, and counterfeiting. And so I looked at the UN Populations Division projections in Africa, and by 2040, there's going to be 2 billion people on the continent. And so we had to try and find a way to rebuild the bridge between conservation and communities, because ultimately it will be the people of this continent that decide the future of conservation. It won't be bigger fences and more guns. And there that the quest really we started digging deeper into how can we find a different solution to protect nature at scale in a sustainable way that involves or puts local communities at the forefront in terms of the protection of their natural heritage. We started to hear more and more about women's empowerment as a stronger movement in other industries that were getting ahead by getting more women on the boards, more women as CEOs, more women in management and key decision-making roles. And we looked at conservation, and women were outnumbered on the front lines at a ratio of around 100 to 1. And so what that does is it restricts women from gaining the experience they need to genuinely move into management roles and oversee operations. And so if other industries were getting ahead by being more inclusive, and if as an industry we were getting it right, as a conservation industry, if we were getting it right, the situation would have been much better. So we started digging deeper. We found that the US forces in Iraq and Afghanistan were now using all female teams to go in and negotiate with local community leaders, because the trust system had been broken with the male teams. There's only so many times you can kick someone's door in at 3 o'clock in the morning and put a gun barrel and a torch in their face, and then try and have a working relationship with them. And so that was interesting from a US military standpoint. The key turning point for us, and at this stage, I'd looked at a bunch of other conservation programs that were inclusive of women but restrictive, where women were given certain roles but not the full role. They were portrayed as doing the full role, but ultimately it was still men that were doing the armed service component of the law enforcement part of conservation, which is a part of the pie. There's lots of other parts that make up a successful conservation model, and it was sort of like a form of tokenism. Women, getting the nice pictures there with with a rifle and the uniform on, and that's used for fundraising, but ultimately they were restricted to protecting a checkpoint or walking a fence line or stuck on a desk. So we started really asking ourselves, well, if women can be trained to do the full role, then why not do it? Because the evidence that we had read at this stage had told us empowering women was the single greatest force for positive change in rural Africa and actually across the world. In a country that, when I first arrived, had the lowest life expectancy in the world for a woman, the marginalized life that they lead in Zimbabwe is extremely tough. And when I got here, the average life expectancy of a woman was 36 years of age. So we're starting to now really drill down on the concept of perhaps starting up an all-female anti-poaching unit, armed, which would become the first one in the world. The final, I think, component for me that said yes, let's do this was when I was in New York in sort of, I think, the second quarter of 2017, and reading an article in the New York Times which said the US Army Rangers were now training women for deployment in frontline roles. I was like, well, okay. I mean, that alone is like, that is enough motivation for us to give this program a trial. But for me, it was a little more personal, because a decade before reading that article, on a mission in northern Baghdad, our convoy had been hit. A few people at the checkpoint killed. I was in the third vehicle. It was the fourth vehicle that had been hit. As we pushed through the contact zone, we were quickly surrounded. by local militia, things were going south very quickly. And we were eventually rescued and extracted by US Army Rangers. So a decade later, reading that article, I'm not only thinking, well, this program is possible, but also thinking if the unit that was good enough to save my life back there in northern Baghdad that day is now deploying women in these frontline roles as Army Rangers, women should be wildlife rangers as well. And that's really the tipping point that drove us to go out and start scoping the start of this program. We found an abandoned trophy hunting reserve in Zimbabwe. Now, trophy hunting is still big business in Africa. Areas held under communal or tribal land trusts, so owned by indigenous communities. That land portfolio is twice the size of the entire national parks portfolio on the continent. So these are significant areas of wilderness. And trophy hunting has traditionally been an economic model that has been used by local communities to try and to generate an income. But the industry is dying. You've got reduced wildlife populations, so there's less product for them to sell. And I hate talking about animals like in this way. I'm just being realistic about the situation on the ground here. You've got tougher regulations for people that want to export the animals they've shot, and then you've got generation raised on social media that doesn't necessarily want to get on a plane and fly across the world to shoot something anymore, which is fantastic. We wanted to look at hunting as an equation to be solved rather than an argument to be had. And we started sitting down with some of the hunters and say, listen, we want to buy out these leases. Some of these leases are huge. You know what I mean? The first area, the lease we bought was 45 years. And we started buying out the leases that these hunters were holding on to. And in the research process, found that there were significant tracts of land, the largest tracts of land on the continent that were available for sale or to go and do long-term deals with local indigenous communities. And so we found we had to find a blank canvas, because we tried in 7 other locations to establish an all-female unit. Nobody wanted to take that what they deemed to be a risk or a chance, and it was only a vacant area that had no economic income stream that we were able to strike a very short-term deal. 3 days they gave us. Zimbabwe is a very patriarchal society, and rural Zimbabwe even more so. So for us to go in there and say to the chief and to the local government, we want to put women into the forefront of conservation and train them to do this traditionally male role it was a new concept for us. It was out of the ballpark for the locals, and that's why they gave us 3 days only to do our selection process. And that, I think in the majority of people's mind, that 3 days would determine that this program is a failure, and we would revert back to a more traditional male-led role or model. And we put out word through the local community and that this program was taking place, and we had 87 women come down. The criteria was we wanted to create an opportunity for survivors of serious sexual assault, domestic violence, AIDS orphans, single mothers, and abandoned wives. And 87 women came down. We sat through the interview processes. They had their sabok, or their local village leader, sit down with them that was verifying the stories that the backgrounds of these women. I've been through a lot of shit in a lot of places. Sitting there for those 2 days was some of the toughest stuff I've ever had to witness. The stories of the hardships that these women had been through was horrific. And the fact that they then had the courage to walk through while being told to go back home, being told to go back to the field, back to the kitchen, they still had the courage to walk through and come and go through this selection, not even knowing what to expect. And we ourselves, as a team of instructors and an organisation, didn't know what to expect. And about halfway through day one, we have something very special here. The distance that a person can place between suffering and breaking is what defines the spirit or the character of an individual. And that is essentially all we need, spirit and character in a ranger. We can train the rest. And when we set the criteria for selection, what we didn't realize is that we're actually getting the toughest. And these women, we started with 16 women protecting an area of 90,000 acres. And over the last 4 years, the program has significantly scaled. In Zimbabwe alone, we have 240 staff that are now part of this program, protecting a land portfolio of 1.3 million acres. These are all former trophy hunting areas. So we have replaced trophy hunting as an economic model in these areas. We've recently just finished the acquisition of a 3 million acre trophy hunting reserve in Botswana, where we'll scale up over the coming years to have hundreds of staff working from local communities working there. And Mozambique, 1.7 million acres on terrestrial, with about 50 kilometres of coastline that will give us access into maritime conservation. And this will all be replication of the Akashinga model. Akashinga is the name that the women gave to themselves, and it translates from local Shona dialect into the brave ones. I'll wrap it up and then hand over for questions. But look, the main things that have made this model work so well is we haven't had a single incidence of corruption with the women. Zimbabwe ranks as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Mozambique also. Removing corruption from what we do shifts the entire dynamics of where our focus has to be. It's one huge thing that we don't have to worry about. And I don't know what it is with the women. They just seem to be far more focused on family and community and don't want to jeopardize what it is they're doing for the sake of an extra couple of $100. The second, and I think the most important thing or defining factor, and I say this from a position of having built a career across 3 continents over the last 20 years in training, preparing and deploying men for combat in both a military and a law enforcement context and conservation. But putting women into the forefront of law enforcement changes the dynamics of society for the better. And we had an opportunity to do something that hadn't been done anywhere else. You can't just go into Chicago and say, all right, we're gonna swap all the men out for all the women, and we're going to see what happens with law enforcement. But we had these vast areas, these trophy hunting areas that we're not getting any investment, where we had a blank canvas to go and trial this model. And the key thing with women at the forefront of law enforcement is that they de-escalate tension. There seems to be a different value system there. This is not a man-bashing exercise. And we're not even a women's empowerment organisation. We're a conservation organisation that just found a better way to do business. Women de-escalate. Now de-escalation in law enforcement or military terms means demilitarization. Demilitarization means significant cost cutting. So we don't have helicopters and airplanes and canine attack teams and drones buzzing around anymore. We have interpersonal relationships that are driven by the women from the communities that they were raised in, and the communities that they were raising their own families in, on land that they've now bought and houses they've now built. We cut our core operating costs by 2/3. So the first third invested into women. The remaining 2/3, this money that we saved, we started investing into healthcare, education, water sanitation, and community development programs. So we centralized our strategy of conservation around women's empowerment. It gave us the greatest traction in community development, and conservation became a byproduct. So we'd moved our model from being inside a reserve looking out to being in the communities looking in, and it's completely shifted. Not only my own philosophy and thoughts on conservation and law enforcement, but it's created a new model that other people and other governments and organizations are replicating now across the continent. And it's, also for us as an organization, we're going through a huge scale up, and it's been based on the success of this program. Essentially, we came into Zimbabwe, a small landlocked country in sub-Saharan Africa, on a continent that's had a 700% increase in armed conflict over the last decade, in an industry that was becoming increasingly antagonistic with local indigenous communities. All we did is we swapped traditionally led male roles for female into female roles, and we put women into these power roles of decision making, leadership, and management. In doing so, we cut our core operating costs by 2/3. The first third invested, as I said, into women is the most effective form of community development funding. The remaining 2/3, again, back into the communities. And in doing all this, we've become more successful at conservation than ever. Now, my closing premise is that if this is possible in Zimbabwe, what's possible beyond this country? And if it's possible in conservation, then what's possible beyond this industry? Thank you very much.
Damien, I could listen to you for another hour, maybe 2, maybe 3. But you're fascinating and so inspiring. And I know that we have a lot of your admirers here tonight. I would love to see if anybody's got a question for Damien. Someone's hand is up straight away. If we can just keep you for a couple more minutes, Damien, we would love that.
I'm good, mate. No, I've got plenty of time.
You're just in the car. You're just hanging out.
Yeah, that's all right. The kids are in the playground, so they're good. They're with friends.
Is it on? Yes. I have 2 questions. One is because you mentioned in the beginning that you were going to talk about your transition
Sure.
to veganism and what that changed in your life, and I'm still curious. The second part is for someone. So I'm a person that my life dream is to do exactly what you're doing right now. I just never felt like I know even where to start. So if you had to give someone an advice on what to do to try to make a change to the world exactly like you're doing, or even would you take people on and work alongside you so people could work and learn from you and actually move to other places and try to do in other places what you're doing there? Is that something that you have an advice for? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, to answer that last part first, the most important thing you can do is make a start. And I get contacted on a daily basis by people that want to do something similar. The ones that make it are the ones that get on an airplane and fly over and travel around and speak to people and see what's going on the ground and find an opening and make it work. And it took us, my position here has been carved out of granite. It's been, there was, many years of hard work, almost being exiled by the industry itself, because, some of your thoughts and processes and particularly I think some of the, a lot of the media attention that we were getting. And it took us 7 years also to figure out exactly what our model or our dance space was in the industry. But the most important thing is to make a start. And I know I'm speaking to a lot of people there today that also feel a frustration that we're not being heard, and we have an important message, a critical message, not just about animals, but what feeds into this global narrative of climate crisis. My advice on that is keep having your conversations, keep getting better at them, because the truth is accumulative. It may feel as though you're speaking to a brick wall, but you're not. It took me a long time to change my thought processes in regards to animals and my lifestyle, but that was a combination of conversations that people have been having with me, and to now switch over to my transition to plant-based or veganism is it was a final acknowledgement from the truth after I would say what I call deep internal interrogation and denial. I'd created this what I call a flexible morality for myself. Humans are creatures of convenience. We want to do things that are convenient for us, and we're brilliant at creating excuses that allow us to keep doing things that deep down we know are not right. And it's just part of our DNA makeup, I think. And I mean, for me, it just, we're out there every day patrolling in the bush in this dangerous environment, risking our lives to protect one group of animals, and coming home and killing another group of animals, but in doing so also funding an industry that's responsible for the degradation of more natural area than any other industry on the planet. And it was hypocritical. I'm getting up on stage around the world giving lectures and telling people they need to protect animals and the environment, and I was going home and eating a steak or whatever and supporting this industry. And it's another, and just the knowledge which I'd suppressed, but the understanding that a cow shares exactly the same capacity to suffer as a rhinoceros, and the only difference in that capacity to suffer is the difference we allow our own minds to accept. And just all of these things too. And I mean, you can bullshit someone else, but ultimately you can't bullshit yourself. And eventually, I think it was in 2012. I'd gone down the rabbit hole in preparation for a TEDx talk at Sydney Opera House, which was supposed to be about anti-poaching, and I stumbled more into animal agriculture and that industry. And Philip Wallen, personal mentor and big backer of our work, who I'm sure if he's not tuned in today, everyone there is aware of, and just such a great advocate. It was a very early and remain ongoing inspiration and mentor to me. Seeing Earthlings, directed by Sean Monson out of Adelaide, very confronting talks. Gary Yourofsky's talk, all of these things. It was just an overwhelming amount of evidence that I couldn't deny anymore. That's now spread throughout our organisation. We have all our staff in Zimbabwe are on a plant-based diet. We have huge gardens here and a whole gardening team, a team of 7 vegan chefs. Here you've got a team of women doing one of the toughest, most respected jobs in some of the most hostile and remote locations on the continent, and they're kicking ass at it. They've made over 300 arrests. They've helped drive an almost 90% downturn in elephant poaching across the region, and seen an almost 400% increase in wildlife populations in their area. And all this is being achieved on a plant-based diet.
Oh, Damien. Has anybody else got a question? I can probably squeeze in one more. Yes, I will come to you with the mic. It's interesting that you spoke about, well, I'm walking over there. It's interesting you spoke about Sir Philip Wallen, because when you mentioned that a cow has the capacity to suffer as a rhino, I thought of his famous saying, a dog is a pig, is a bear, is a boy. I've stuffed it up, but it was one of his quotes that I thought of about how we all have the same capacity to suffer, and we do. And he's been here to the Vegan Festival a couple of times, Sir Philip Wallen. Ask your question.
Thank you. Is it on? Yep.
We on? Yep.
So you sort of touched on my question a little bit a moment ago. I've often heard the comment made that veganism is a privilege that those of us in first world urban environments, have the privilege of, but that millions, if not billions, of people in third world countries living in food deserts don't have that privilege. And so I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on that as a broader issue, but then specifically living in Zimbabwe. I don't know a lot about Zimbabwe, but I am a little curious as to whether it's been difficult eating a plant-based or vegan diet in a country like Zimbabwe, and what are the challenges around that?
Well, what most people don't realise is that the majority of Africa was raised on a largely plant-based diet. And many of the traditional or indigenous crops, have been replaced by colonial crops that have been brought in, and the animal agriculture. And traditionally, animals were reserved for primarily ceremonial purposes. And so, going back to a lot of these traditional roots, well, we have our food program is called Back to Black Roots, and it focuses on teaching our staff first about how to grow their own food, how to prepare their own meal plans from a nutritional and environmental and an ethical standpoint, how to talk about it. Stage 2 is working with their families, stage 3 is working with communities, and stage 4 is building ambassadors. And so it is very possible. It comes down to education, because many African countries have struggling healthcare systems, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, blood pressure issues. These are all things that can be largely treated or prevented through a healthy whole foods plant-based diet. And so creating these sort of levels of education within communities as a preventative to these healthcare issues is an important part of our community development programs. Look, I understand there are some areas around the world where it's very hard to grow crops, and the traditional food is, unlike Africa, has been largely meat based. But I think we got to look at things. Where can we make the largest impact at scale? We look at the industrialization of animal agriculture and what that is doing to the planet. I'd love to be optimistic and say, animals will be, completely off the table by, 2030 or 2040. The reality is there's still going to be some, plenty of communities around the world that would still rely on some form of animal agriculture. But I think the really exciting things that are happening in terms of plant-based meat alternatives, but also cell grown or lab grown cell-based meat products as well, that would use, more than 90% less water and land without any suffering, without any hormones or antibiotics. These are exciting sort of spaces to watch, and I think hopefully we reach a point soon, because it's so important, not just in terms of animal suffering, but from an environmental standpoint, as a global community, what we have been doing to the planet. That we look at the big picture and figure out how our lifestyles can be a part of the direction that big picture needs to look like.
Damien, thank you so much. Yes, thank you. If anybody wants to see more of what Damien does, Akashinga, The Brave Ones is the documentary. You can, of course, donate to the International Anti-Poaching Foundation and to Akashinga. So you can find them on Instagram, on the website. And it's very hard not to listen to you and not be inspired to want to go out and do something within our own communities and our own spaces. So I hope everybody takes a little bit of Damien away with them today and feels empowered within their own lives to take some action. So thank you so much for your time again, Damien, and Adelaide has loved having you. And all the best. All the best. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, there, for what you're doing, and you guys, congratulations on putting together the festival. And keep up the good work, everyone, and keep fighting the good fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damien and Mander.
Cheers, guys.
Come up to the stage. I'm not going to go up to the stage. I'm in heels. I'm done climbing things. Cal Williams Jr., who we heard before Damien, is back. This is a new collaborative project that he's got with Koi, who was up here before, and Mary Trees. They are great moose. And this is a debut, am I right? This is a debut for the Adelaide Vegan Festival, just for you all here today. This is a blues act. Stick around. Take it away.
Thank you. Going to do a start with a little song called Pal on the Floor. What an amazing